every single person I've asked, I say names of heritage trades workers in Alberta, and the first name on almost every list is Peter Caron. So glad we got that going. I knew that was even the first name on Dave's list when he gave me was Peter Caron. So here we are, finally. First off, we'll just start with an intro. Like I said, Peter Caron, but you can do name, trades worked, and years involved in these trades.
The first historic building that I worked on was 1972. So you have to do the math.
Almost 50.
I would say I do log work, timber framing, clay plastering, roof thatching, historic doors and windows. I've done a lot of canoes and snowshoes, a very traditional, a range of traditional building crafts. I guess I could have wrote it down if I thought.
Oh, that's fine. Maybe it's better asked, what don't you do almost, but
so
that's fantastic. No, continue if you like.
So I guess so I do and I've continuously, so 90 some percent of what I do since the early 70s is all heritage work. And I've worked from New Brunswick all the way to BC, Yukon, Yellowstone, down in Texas, New York, Maine. Lots of different locations, historic sites, some private and public buildings as well. The Alberta government found me in Ontario in the late 70s doing historic buildings through my friend Martin Weaver, who used to run Heritage Canada.
Okay.
And on his recommendation, I came, and I've been in Alberta since 78. But from here, I've traveled all over the country again.
Fantastic. What drew you toward the heritage trades?
Sorry?
What drew you towards historic buildings compared to other work?
First bird. I mean, it's a. My family came to what's now Canada in 1624.
Wow.
First guy in my family to come, his name was George, and he settled in a small outpost on the north shore of the St. Lawrence village, close to what's now Quebec City.
Fantastic.
In 1624. So I have really clear memories of living in Quebec City when I was preschool age, and my father was a big fan of history, and so endlessly going to churches and historic buildings and historic places throughout my youth, including periods of time when we lived in Germany for a few years, and I've traveled all through Europe on my own, and that's all I do is visit historic. All I did was visit historic places, and my first opportunity, I say in the early 70s, in my youth, quite a few of my friends were in their 80s and 90s. So there was a group of boys that I was the kid. And so these old guys who were born in the late 1800s, I had befriended a group of them and hung out with them. And I learned how things were done in their youth.
Yeah.
And inherited some of their tools when they passed away. and their knowledge and the way they learned and their stories, which at the time was, I thought was an unbelievable experience.
No kidding.
And the older I get, the more valuable experience that it is. You know, I just put so much value on that time in my life, and I've continued that. You know, if I hear about somebody, then I go find them who's still doing something in a very traditional way. You know, we just buried my good friend Art, who died on the celebration of 100 years of his family being on the same farm in Alberta here. And so we had his birthday, celebrated the anniversary.
That's awesome.
And then he passed away. So I continue to seek out I guess training and those people who have that experience, while also realizing, oh my goodness, I'm going to become one of those guys, one of those old guys.
There's no rush on that though.
No, but you know, I'm still, I'm the wrong person to ask stuff about historic trades and buildings, because I try to always say yes.
Yeah.
So, you know, and over the years I've accumulated way too many tools, and you know, a personal library of books from the 1700s all through the 1800s, all trades related, and it's just if you ask Charlotte, who just drove away, I'm probably the most insanely curious person she's ever met in her life, right? So
that's good.
It's fantastic. It's a bit of a curse, you know, at times, but it's
there's worse things to be known as, right?
It's a fantastic way to, for me. I wouldn't have it any other way, you know. It's taken me to some fabulous places, and I've met some incredible people over the years. So anyways, that's
great. And you know, coming up on 400 years of your family being in Wisdom, Canada, and are they still in Quebec? Is where?
Yep.
And you were born there.
I was born in Kingston, Ontario, a very historic town.
The Frontenac's, yeah.
Yeah, and so I know all those buildings on the waterfront from you know, my childhood down there. Lots of history and all along the St. Lawrence there. So
that's amazing. That's you know, if you're gonna learn about it, if you're born in Canada, that's the place to be. You know, is in and around that area, and you know, coming to Alberta with such a compared to Quebec and Ontario, a shorter history of heritage things.
Well, the 400 years that my family has been in that region in Alberta is compressed into 100 years.
Yeah.
So it's an unbelievably compact history.
Yeah, no kidding. Compared to the other provinces, even going to Manitoba.
Yeah, compared to other places. So it's you know, it's pretty intense.
And if you're going to learn from it, it's great to learn from people that, you know, people will say, oh, I learned from guys that were growing up in the 50s or 60s. You're learning from guys that grew up in the late 1800s. That's
late 1800s. I worked on historic buildings at John Slemko. We were standing outside. I restored his house and at the Ukrainian village, and we were standing outside his house chatting because his older brother had passed away, and I had done clay plastering with his older brother, and John and I were standing outside to the front of the house, and you know, he was kind of drifting away on me, you know, when we were talking, and he grabs me by the shoulder and he says, I was born right there, pointing at the ground just outside the front door. You know? And it's like his mom didn't quite make it back to the house, and he was born right on the ground.
There.
It's like, wow, you know, the memories that people, well, he wouldn't have remembered, but, you know, people's personal stories and memories when they're standing at a historic building. And those days are gone. Right?
And even to the land itself there.
And to, yeah, it's quite memorable and fascinating, you know.
No kidding.
I was thinking on the drive down today of the list of people that I've interacted with over the years.
Mm-hmm. That'll be a fun part. We'll get to. I'm going to be asking for your mentors and people that you worked with, and that's going to be a fun part. I think we'll get there in a moment.
Okay.
Moving on, I'll just ask you to describe quickly however long you want to take, the skills and knowledge needed for your specific trades. What are critical skills and knowledge you need?
I guess, right, you know, everybody would start with an interest, right?
Mm-hmm.
An interest, and the interest turns into a real passion. And the reality is to do some very traditional things. There are some things that machines can't do. So some of it is quite physically difficult. But you know, at this point, when I was younger, it was you know, everybody's a young man, you know, and have lots of bravado, and so you think things take a lot of strength, right? And now I'd say it takes a lot of focus and strength, and it's very much a fast food world these days. Mm-hmm. So not everybody wants to do this the slow way, but it is a passion. It's developed for me. It was a very early passion that I never walked away from.
Yeah.
And so I would think a real curiosity and a willingness to learn. And there's I guess depends on the project, depends on the client, how much support there is, you know, for replicating historic details. And my preference is always to replicate historic details using the same tools, recognizing the tools that the original builder used and using those tools to replicate details. And that's where these days, I mean, I have machines in my shop too, but and it's hard to compete with hand tools. Mm-hmm. But when I train people, some aren't that happy with it because I would prefer you learn with hand tools before moving to machine. Mm-hmm. And then you have a real understanding of the skill, the trade, what's involved. For roof thatching, we harvested straw. In years past, I've had crops of straw grown in Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba, and in all cases, we're harvesting was 1920s vintage machinery, doing everything by hand, and it draws out. Even just a few years ago, it draws out guys who are 92 years old, and experience their stories. And so it's a real passion and a curiosity.
Yeah, I think the willingness to learn is a big thing, part of it too. You know, there's that's what in a couple of the interviews, that's what other interviews have said, is the willingness to learn is the biggest thing. You know, a lot of people come in thinking they're going to use these power tools and these machinery, but first you have to learn with the hand tools to get the real understanding.
It's a certain amount of patience.
Yeah, that's was Phil from Ukrainian Village. That was his big word, just patience. That's all it was. But yeah, no, continue.
Yeah.
I like the line. I wrote it down in quotes. Recognize the tools the original builder uses, and I think that's alluding to what Dave was talking about. How you can have original methods of doing it, but using those tools as well as something that's quite important.
Yes.
Yeah. Moving on, I'll ask you, just in your opinion on this, the heritage trades and knowledge of the past, including the building materials itself, are fast disappearing. In your opinion, what trades or building practices do you feel are the most threatened right now?
All of the traditional ones are. All of the traditional ones, everything that was on my list. You know, the timber framing guild is pretty strong. But the hand tools, again, is not as strong as it could be. Log building is strong in a modern way, but the very traditional methods are not as strong as they could be. And that's a sign of the times, right? It's a production world. The clay plastering, there's some revival of the clay plastering, but it's being lost. It's been modified to accommodate 2021 or the last 50 years. So the very traditional methods are on the decline. And part of it is there's nowhere to go to learn the real traditions. But all of those things, they're all threatened, I would say.
Yeah, I was even a couple weeks ago talking to a stone worker. He's from England, and
Yes.
he was talking about how where he grew up, you learn these traditional methods at an earlier time compared to Alberta, at least, where you have 8 and 8, where they teach you the modern methods of these tools. And your first time doing it might be when you're 18, 19 years old going to university, compared to him being 12 or 13 for the first time using it and building up that admiration for the skill. So I think that's
well, and lots of traditional apprenticeships. I worked with some guys for 5-6 years to learn things, right? And I actually have people who say, "I heard you're doing this. Can I come by for the afternoon?" And I sort of respectfully decline. Because years ago, I did say yes before, and somebody comes by for the afternoon, and then I hear, "Oh, I was trained by Peter." Whoa, and they're doing bad work. So
you can't learn it in an afternoon. It takes years.
In this day and age, people think they can. It's a YouTube world. It's people think they can learn in a compressed amount of time, super compressed amount of time. And most of the things that I spent years working with guys, and that's what it takes.
Yeah, you have to have the willingness to learn, but you also have the patience to learn it too. It's not a willingness to submit one afternoon of your work.
That's what it is. And some of the work is not consistent, right? So you're doing 5 months here and 5 months there. And
yeah, some of it's even seasonal.
And some of it is seasonal, and yeah. So it's just you're sort of in it for the long term. To be a real craftsman, it takes years and years.
Yeah.
To reach a certain level.
Yeah, that's what it takes, and there's no way around it, especially when you're.
I don't think so. I mean, Jacob Lisher. I worked with Jacob Lisher. Used to be my neighbor 7 miles down the road. Jacob handmade the cannons of Louisburg.
Awesome.
So he had a blacksmith shop, and I used to hang out with him and do blacksmithing years ago. And Jacob was an old school. He did an old school apprenticeship.
Mm-hmm.
So we'd be working, and Jacob would be teaching me something, and in his old school German way, get outside.
Yeah.
So I wasn't allowed to watch step 2 until I could do step 1. Almost with my blindfold over one eye and one arm tied behind my back. You're not even watching step 2.
Don't worry about it yet.
Yeah, don't worry about it.
You'll get there.
I'll tell you when you're there. Is when. And I never took it personally.
No,
I was never in that big a rush. Okay, Jacob, it's your show. Do as you like. So you go stand outside and wait for him to call you back in. But will people do that today? I don't know.
likely not. I guess
I don't think so.
It's not
it's
a-
like go,
Yeah.
go, and so.
That's I like that. That's definitely it makes you think about how it's changed, and doing now it's all steps at the same time, and you should work on all the steps. But I like the traditional German Jacob Lischner method, we'll call it.
I've done. I mean, I'm a journeyman carpenter, so I've done some of the apprenticeship, but I challenged the carpenter's ticket successfully without doing all the schooling and without doing all the 4 years of apprenticeship, just based on the skills and knowledge that I had. Anyways, but. I don't think the modern apprenticeship system is go, right?
Yeah.
And that's not the way I learned a lot of things,
Yeah. I mean,
it's a go and do this until you're bleeding it, right? Then you can learn this, and I just don't know if it fits in the world today.
It's definitely a slower process, but it's arguably better.
But you learn, you learn in a different way, and so.
That's great. Yeah, that's fantastic. I like that. It makes me kind of think about the class at state, or if you have a welding class at state and you have 45 people standing outside, makes me chuckle. I did that today, but it does work. Now, obviously for you, the knowledge you still have is still there, but for others, what knowledge have you seen disappear in your lifetime? And how do you think this has impacted the preservation of your trade?
I would say a lot of the people that I interacted with and trained with, in hindsight, all passed away on me, right? So if I got 50, 60, 70% of what they knew, fantastic.
Mhm.
Right?
No kidding.
Between me and the next generation, 50% of that is a pretty small picture
That's 25% from them before. Right?
right. But you have to put in the time.
Mhm.
I've had six apprentices over the years that have gone on to be journeymen. Not all of them, of course, work in the heritage field, because it's not that big a field.
It's less of a demand.
Right. So, you go where the work is, right? People have families and things like that. And I was never overly concerned. I was concerned about raising my family and paying the bills, but not to the point where that I was more concerned with the preservation and honing my skills than I was about anything else.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, that's another point that the stoneworker I was telling you about. He said you have to have an actual interest to actively get into these trades, because there's the majority of the work is elsewhere, and so you have to want to do this as well as
you have to
know it.
really want to do it, and basically I'm a pretty private person, but if I hear of somebody, go find them,
Mhm.
go have coffee with them, right? And introduce myself. This is what I do. This is what I hear you do. And on their terms. Get whatever knowledge I can from them.
That's where the curiosity comes in.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
And it's taken me. I've read an article, and on Tuesday I've been on a plane to France on Thursday,
Mhm.
and it took me 3 months to go find somebody, and then it's like, I read about you, and I wanted to ask you a question face to face, right? So I've done that kind of stuff, and I'm not overly. This is why I like the face to face kind of things rather than
Over the laptop and
over the
or just even over the phone. Yeah.
Yes, well, but face to is nothing like.
Oh yeah,
Nothing
absolutely.
like face to face.
Totally agree.
And
Yeah, and that's and even the easier way of showing it, having people come to your shop, or you go to their shop, or having your apprentice work with you in person.
yeah, I brought a couple of pictures of the spaces that I work in.
Yeah.
And they can be very personal spaces, right?
For sure. That's actually the last question I'm going to ask you is going to kind of allude to that. Talking with the fellow from the Ukrainian village, he was talking about his shop, and that's his zone is in his shop, and having that symphony with the tools and instruments that he's using is really just, it's personal. It's your space. It's private, but it's also what you want to show people as well. It's a demonstration zone. And so I would love to take a look at those in a moment for sure. And I'll also ask you what knowledge about materials and practices to you are the most important to transmit to the next generation of tradespeople. What do you feel is most important? And it can include these photos or whatever you like.
Yeah, well, it's the skills, it's the tools, it's material is just not the same. Some materials are just not the same.
Such as
wood. Yeah. Old growth wood and timber is not the same as the new wood.
What's changed with the wood?
That's just the way it grows, the amount of sunlight and water that it gets, the density of the forest, so how fast the trees grow.
Yeah.
And now they're on a cyclical harvest, right? So so the really old growth people are putting value on big value on old growth materials. I know for other materials like the straw that we've grown in the past are all 1920s varieties.
Mhm.
It's not the straw. It's not the straw that other people are growing in the fields. So it's a traditional variety. My friend Archie he grew traditional crops, and he raised ancient breeds of animals that other people around North America would buy animals from him to reintroduce old genetic qualities to their new stock, so they'd be stronger, healthier animals.
That's awesome.
So that group of guys, and even in my 50s, I was the kid in that group of guys. I asked the kid to do it, and I'd look around, and it was like,
Still you.
Must be me. But you just take it in your stride.
Yeah, no kidding.
So in the days when we used to all get together for sheep shearing once a year, and so we ran out of cream one time. We were sitting around having lunch, and I had brought a couple of government guys down with me because I wanted to see what was going on. And so we ran out of cream. So Artin is way just goes outside, right? He grabs a goat, shoves it between his legs. Milks the goat, brings the cream back to
there. You go. Goodness, dude.
The government guys just about had cardiac arrest.
That's the way to do it. That's it. That's exactly it, right? Like,
this is a very, very traditional. Everything is. My whole experience has been with these other one for sure, and sometimes two generations prior to me. I had interactions with people that were, and they think nothing of it. Right?
Yeah.
So.
Yes, and it's not even rejecting modernity, but it's accommodating it with the traditional methods of you can accept it. It's not a complete denial of what's 2021's providing.
Absolutely not.
It's just incorporating with the historic elements of it.
Yeah.
And did you have any materials or practices that you feel are the most important to pass down to your apprentices or the next generation of tradespeople?
Some people want to learn straight up woodworking and straight up modern woodworking. And some people take a bit of an interest in some aspects of historic work. The guys at the Ukrainian village, for instance, they would have learned from somebody that I trained many years ago. So I know, as we talked about before, there's a loss between me and the fellow that I trained and the guys that are there now. And it's going that fast.
Yeah, every generation's a little bit more.
And a bigger loss, percentage-wise.
For sure.
A bigger loss, and it's. But I'm not sure every generation realizes that.
But there is a loss of that.
They know what they know.
Yeah.
People, they know what they know, but they don't know everything in that. Whatever you want to call that, but it's bigger loss.
The succession line of it.
Bigger loss every time. I think and it's
it's going, and it's tough to preserve it when there's a lack of interest in there's not as much of a field for it. It's
if there's nowhere to go, if there's nowhere to go to learn something,
how are you gonna learn it?
How are you going to learn it? Right? If there's but then you look at I don't know, I guess YouTube things.
Yeah.
If there's I have I'm 3 walls in my office is not enough room for. I still have piles of books on the floor.
Yeah.
I have no place to put in bookshelves.
Mm-hmm.
From many different countries, all about traditional building and crafts and including all, so it's just, I don't know what I'm supposed to do with all that.
Yeah, there's
but
a surplus.
I keep coming, I just keep bringing it in and but if people should, people need to really want to do this.
It's the willingness combined with the curiosity that you have, for sure.
Yeah, I think curiosity is a big one, right?
For sure.
And willingness.
Yeah, I think those are the 2 themes we're kind of centering around, and I like that. Those are 2 really good points.
Yeah.
I'll narrow it down for you, and I'll make you point out what's the single most important skill that you need to have for any type of trades that you do, or crafts or anything, because we'll talk about willingness and curiosity as more of a mentality of it, but what's that skill? Patience was a couple answers you've gotten.
Patience, willingness to work with your hands, the willingness to work with your hands, and focus. Focus is a big one. Hand tools is major focus. Power tools are major focus. I forget which Olympics it was. Early Olympics. Early in the 1900s. The world champion rower from Canada wasn't allowed to compete because he was a brick mason.
No kidding.
Too far down the social scale. The gentleman could compete in international competition, but the bricklayer couldn't. So I'm not sure how much that still. I don't know if the trades still struggle with with that. There's always a shortage of tradesmen. So I don't know if it's still looked on.
Yeah, it's almost as if there's a stigma around it of lower class or lower intelligence when it's completely untrue. But
yeah, it's not lower intelligence. I had a guy. I'm not at liberty to tell you who it is. I had a guy actually sit in front of me one time, and I was saying, talking about some of these guys that I had known and worked with in my lifetime and career, and he actually referred to them as dumb farmers.
No.
And it just about went over the top of his desk.
Yeah.
To get at him.
Mm-hmm. If you ever talk to a farmer day in life, it's the opposite.
I've never met a dumb farmer.
Yeah, no kidding, right?
Who are, extremely creative and
for sure.
People who, left, God knows what they left to come here to Canada and continue to be peasants, but survived with way less than what we had.
Mm-hmm.
And were very creative
and have the willingness and the curiosity
and the
drive and the focus.
and just to survive, and did well.
Mm-hmm.
So that's admirable, you know. So
Yeah, the dumb farmer, that's completely incorrect.
so that was just about the time when we buried Art,
Oh yeah?
who had just celebrated 100 years
Mhm.
of his family being on the same farm.
Yeah.
I have some fantastic photos of his dad pulling farm machinery with a team of 22 horses
Yeah.
in front of it, you know.
That's awesome.
So it's like, wow.
Yeah, the innovation, the creativity, and then I was talking to my grandfather, who was a farmer as well, and the things that he would do to make things last a little bit longer is you don't have to go and purchase new things. You can make new things. But I remember camping growing up, and he'd take a light bulb that was burnt out, and he'd just fiddle with it in 5 minutes and last for another month, you know. And it's that innovation, right? And that's exactly what it is. And that's a fantastic trait of a person to pass down.
And it's a very disposable society these
Exactly.
days, you know. So in part, you know, part of what I'm doing is okay. Go ahead.
Sure. Yeah. Focus. And now you were talking about growing up, and you had these people from the 1800s and your neighbor Jacob. But where else did this knowledge come from? Did you have any formal education with it, or just kind of learning by doing it, or where were other sources of knowledge of your trades?
Mostly it's interacting with all these different people, and then you know, because I've worked with a lot of different people, and then over the years, you know, I've there was Jacob, there was Armand Ducharme, who we did blacksmithing and traditional French Canadian log work. Alan Mackey, who was, you know, the sort of guru of log building years ago. I worked with him.
Arthur, I'm sure as well.
Pardon?
Arthur as well, I'm sure.
Yep, Art. Yeah, Art, and that group of guys. That was he was one of the youngest of the group. So there was. But lots of people, and then, you know, going to conferences, and Harrison Goodall, worked with Harrison Goodall, who was developed his own line of epoxies, and we worked on Morris Geyser Museum in Yellowstone, and he was developing all kinds of modern techniques with epoxies and big timbers at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I worked with the sons of some pioneers to do clay plastering, and I've worked with modern adobe builders down in New Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
So both ends of the scale, right? So this is the way it was, and this is the way it is. Four different roof thatchers that I worked with from different parts of Europe. All had slight variations of the craft based on the country they came from, and even the county within that country that they came from.
Mm-hmm.
Different log builders, and then you know, developed a sense of how things go together. And then you always have to be creative if you're some other time. You know, like fill your brain with images of lifting buildings and splitting buildings and taking them apart and putting them all back together. So you don't know I've been there. And so the next guy who opens it up sees the same kind of evidence from my tools that I brought with me today, that are the same tools that the original builder would have used. So I'm leaving the same marks, but I leave a little message in the building. You know, I've been here.
Little signature.
I've been here. You know, so the next guy 100 years down the road
We'll know.
we'll find a message.
It's amazing. Now, tell me more about your mentors and about the people that were influential on your work. And you're talking about these people that you grew up with, and you were the kid even when you were 50. What work were they doing as well that they passed down to you? Was it what you do now is what they were doing, or were they doing other stuff as well?
A lot of them were farmers. A lot of them were farmers who brought those basic skills with them from wherever, or their fathers. They were the sons of the original pioneers in Alberta. And so they grew up with very traditional things, and the houses that they built in Canada were very replicas of the houses that their families left behind, whichever country they came from. Yeah, there's a big list of people that I didn't. I thought about writing them down, all the names.
That can always be in part 2 if we get to one.
Yeah, all the names. I'll try and, you know, but things like this is a broad axe handle. So this handle was made for me from by old John, and old John lived in a dovetailed log cabin with red shutters on the windows with ponies cut into them, right? And so John was born in 1892, and so we hung out quite a bit in the early years, and we'd sit in the shed and tell me stories and make things and show me how to do things, and you know, the only way to afford to do that is to be sleeping in your car or a barn, right? So, and I spent quite a bit of time doing that. And I copy this one when I need a handle, but I've never put this one on an axe.
That's the original.
This is the original, in case I ever lost or gave away that axe or sold that axe. And I didn't want to give up. I figure a couple of these tools and my canoe paddle, I get buried with them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
they come with me, so
that's great.
So that's what I say, because it sounds good. You know, I don't know what will actually happen.
Yeah.
But
it's yours.
Yeah, you know, but that and my paddle. So, you know, a guy named Ron taught me a lot about snowshoes and canoes. We built canoes totally with hand tools, no power tools at all. You know, I've known some bush rats over the years who, you know, come to town once a year.
Yeah.
And but they're very, you know, this is what I need, so I make it. Right?
Yeah.
So
nothing wrong with that.
No, my daughter grew up with me, and of course, I had that attitude. You know, you need a bed, well, we'll make a bed, right? You need this, well, we'll make this, right? And so. Now she's in her mid-30s now, but she once said to me, "All the guys I know are useless."
Yeah, coming from you,
they look good, right? Can't do anything, you know.
Maybe she could do more than that, I'm sure, with her eyes closed.
Some days she thinks she can.
Oh yeah.
So, yeah. But yeah, the John Stanko was a guy I worked with. And, he was a super talented woodworker. Just came by it naturally, you know. And but he was basically a farmer here in Alberta.
farmer by trade and tradesperson by necessity.
Necessity. Yeah. But yeah, and clay plastering was from Sons of Pioneers. Some of the other traditional trades. It still exists, but John recently passed away. Eastfield Village in New York.
Yeah.
Is a small training center for traditional crafts, and I knew John and worked with him and took some courses from him years ago. Sometimes these days, it's restoration is has become more of an intellectual thing than a hands-on thing.
Yeah, I was going to ask. Now it sounds like you've obviously traveled a lot, and coming from Eastern Canada into Alberta, and how has the impact of different geographical areas impacted what you learned from trades? Because you've learned different things everywhere, right?
It's very interesting. One of the things that I do is build these clay bake ovens for baking bread. I've built a lot of them over the years, and so you go to Quebec, they claim it as their own, right?
Yeah.
You go to Ontario, the Scots will claim it as their own, right? You come out to Western Canada, the Russians, or the Finnish, we invented that. The Ukrainians, we invented that. Hudson's Bay, down to Fort Edmonton. Hudson's Bay, those guys, they invented that, right? So it's like everything is everybody's claim to fame. But there are, very interestingly, there are slight variations. Ethnic groups, as I said before, counties within a country are doing it slightly different. Everybody, and then plus individual craftspeople can put their signature on things in how they do something. So some things, if you knew, you could look at something and go, I know who did that.
Yeah, it's the finished one right there.
Yeah, and you might even know the person who did it, depending where you are, right? So, yeah,
that's interesting.
So it is very interesting and I've never challenged anybody, of course, but it's very interesting to see all these different ethnic groups, and I don't know if one influenced the other, or if it's something that everybody sort of
everyone kind of needed it,
needed it and discovered it at their own sort of time. And so yeah.
That's fantastic. That's great. And if you want to demonstrate, or
I can't demonstrate anything,
or just talk about it.
Anyways, there's the handle that John made for me, and I have patterns that I was just shopping for wood the other day, of my own version of this kind of handle that because it's offset, as you can see. So when you're working with it, there's room for your hands to not be brushing up against the wood that you're working on. So that's John's version, and now there's my version.
What would be different with your version?
Mine's a bit of a dog leg.
Okay.
So it's a different shape. So part of what I'm doing is, as I said, match the tool marks from the tools that the original builder used. So there's a sample of clay from clay plastering, and for walls, ceilings, clay bake ovens. I've built bake ovens that are over 6,000 pounds of clay like this, that you heat it up and it radiates the heat back to bake bread. So and that's an original recipe.
And what would it take to make that?
Well, you can mix it by hand or by foot if you want. But that's basically clay sand with a straw.
Okay.
So, and depending on its application and the maintenance issues that go along with it, today you can add other things to it to make it a little bit more water repellent.
Yeah.
There's a slick, a chisel. One of my favorites. This one is 1832.
Wow.
So
Original. That's the original.
this is 1832.
That's awesome.
So you know, it's fun to work on an 1800s building with an 1800s
No kidding.
tool.
Yeah.
Right.
No kidding.
So, but that's a Albertan out of Rochester. So this is a Walters axe. Walters axes were in production here in Canada from about 1860 to about 1940. So again, it's fun to work on. I have other Canadian, lots of Canadian tools. This is a Mueller broad axe. It's a goosewing broad axe. So this company has been in continuous production of axes since the 1660s.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, there are some modern tools that are out there that mostly I use
That's fantastic.
traditional tools, and the finding them is getting harder and harder. Finding original hardware is getting harder and harder. Finding all the components of the building, glass, are just getting harder and harder.
Painted it too.
So, you know, it's sourcing all that material, sourcing the tools, learning how to use the tools. It's been a great adventure.
And what would you say is particular about these tools compared to the modern tools, or even tools built in 1980?
They have a spirit, right?
Yeah.
They have a spirit. When you pick them up,
Yeah.
they have spirit. They have some of the tools, like this one, I can actually tell you the story. I know the guy, I knew the guy who made it. And I used John's broad axe. So he's one of the guys that John took great pleasure in sitting in the shade, yelling at me working in the sun, telling me, don't be such a hack. Get your rhythm, stop using your shoulders like that. While he's sitting in the sun. He's sitting in the shade, man.
You're out there working in the sun.
Dying in the hot sun, right? Working, and took great pleasure.
And all that's transferred into that axe until now. All that spirit.
This and a couple other tools that you pick them up, and it's like the memories come back, and I remember what you said to me that day, right? And so a lot of the tools that I have, I inherited from people that I've met along my way, and some I've collected in my travels because they're particularly good examples. A certain tool.
And I'm glad you brought up that spirit, because that's actually a question I have for you. Is that crafts and trades and tools, that they're all based on a spirituality, and I was just curious if you have any other thoughts on this, and where do you think this spirituality comes from, and if you have any examples of like John's axe and any more, I'd love to hear it.
Oh, that's part of just the willingness to, this is what I'd like to do, and like anything else, it's who you learn from and the people that influence you along the way, and I guess but to had to own things like this, that the tools that you figure have spirit. You know, I feel for guys who were a couple generations younger than me, that they, you know, whoever's influenced them, I don't know. You know, there's definitely, I think the older you get, the more you get connected to all those events that have happened in your life.
Mm-hmm.
And you develop more of I have developed more of a sense of connection to, you know, this particular piece of wood. Right?
Yeah.
When you're younger, not so much. You know, so, and if you had, you know, and my whole life, you know, because of how I grew up in all of the different historic cities and the influence from my dad. And there was a time when my family, my great-grandparents and my great-grandfather all lived in the same house at the same time. Big old rambling house, right? So, and even that affects my day-to-day. How I live and the memories that I have, and that affects my day-to-day life. So I guess, you know, personal upbringing, whatever it might be, you know.
Well, I was even going to ask. We were talking earlier about having your shop as kind of this spiritual place as well. And you're surrounded by all these tools that have the spirits and these voices of the past with them. And any specific examples that you can think of from your shop or from your workplace that you have, it's a private area.
My life is full of this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like I go to work and then go home.
Yeah.
Right?
That is your life with it.
Because my the space that I live in, there's a bunch of this stuff in it. My office has not so much tools, but it's my personal, it's my library, right? Here's a good you tell me what this looks like to you. That's one of my spaces. There, I'm making traditional wooden brackets there. There's more stuff. Handles on tools. This is up here. This is a collection of wooden planes that was made in Kingston Penitentiary.
Oh, no kidding.
In about 1860. So the convicts there were learning a trade while they were at Kingston Penitentiary. A bunch of 1800s Stanley.
I love that you're using antlers as a shelf on this one.
50s and you know, I used to drive my daughter crazy. We'd be driving down the highway going somewhere, and it's like pull over fast. You know, that looks like nice clay.
Yeah.
Find out whose land that was. Try and get a sample and write it down. And, of course, I have too many axes and axe handles.
Yeah, if you don't mind, we'll
brackets and stuff coming out the yin yang. That you know, there's all so. You know, there's Charlotte is Charlotte. I can go home and disappear for 3 days at a time.
Yeah, no kidding.
see you later, and I'm get involved in something, right? And get my brain wrapped around something, or this is what I'm doing, and I don't surface again.
Yeah.
You know, I don't have a cell phone. I'm not very good at answering the phone or things like that. So
That's okay.
And so it's not something that for me, this type of work and stuff doesn't go away.
No, and that's
it's
fine.
just, you know, it's any time, almost any time of day, any time of, it's just consuming, but I'm okay.
That's good.
I'm okay. You know, I'm not too much of a nutball, but just, but it doesn't go away for me. And the phone keeps ringing. You know, there's interesting things up there. So yeah,
That's great. And I'll ask to take copies of these photos, and we'll pop them on the internet or on the interview for when we're talking about these. We'll have the photos up if that's all right with you.
Yeah, sure.
And I'll ask you one more before I pass over to Dave. You may have additional comments, but what's the hardest part of getting it right? What's the hardest thing to do to get it right?
The hardest part of getting it right is getting it wrong and having to do it again.
Get it right the first time. Eh?
Well, easier said than done to get it right the first time. Totally easier said than done. Sometimes material, this ugly stick here that's holding up the ceiling, and there's not a very overly friendly piece of wood, right? Just because of its structure.
Mm-hmm.
And the biggest timber I ever, a huge square, was 24 inches square, 40 feet long. And that took me a week to make that one piece just with hand tools. And the mate to that piece, on the third side, had a big rock pocket in it.
Oh.
It's no good.
Yeah.
So I could cut it off and make a shorter piece out of it.
Yeah.
But I didn't get my 40-footer.
Yeah.
So
No
I had
kidding.
to start all over again.
Yeah. It's
Right?
another month of work.
And the hardest part of getting it right is getting it right.
Mm-hmm.
And it, as I said before about focus, when you're doing things that need focus, some days you can do it, some days you can't.
Yeah.
Life gets in your way, right? Some days you're just distracted.
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard to do things.
Mm-hmm.
And you just
Can't force it.
You have to walk away. Yeah. And there's other factors like the quality of your material are out of your control.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, how the timbers change over time.
I have broken axe handles on frozen wood.
Yeah.
You know, okay, fine. Going back, we up in the Quebec side there, we used to fall tree, very traditional. You know, we fell trees in the bush and hewed them square right where they fell, and then skid them out by horses.
Mm-hmm.
Totally traditional, you know, and it's as dangerous today as it used to be 100 years ago. And people don't have the same sense these days. You know, even people who work at historic places, they don't have the sense, because I think it's, you know, you're you just don't have the same sense.
Yeah.
You know? I don't go home and become somebody else.
Yeah.
It's not just a job, you know.
It's your life. It's your lifestyle.
You know, and whether that's you know, I know Charlotte thinks it's a bit of a curse sometimes. But she's okay. She's okay at this point. It's been too long.
You should put up with it.
I know. Yeah. So
That's great.
but yeah, it's been a fantastic journey.
Mhm. Yeah, no kidding. Well, those are questions I have. Do you have any questions for Dave?
Well, that was good. That was spot on, Peter.
That was great.
Happy?
Oh yeah, that was fantastic.